Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to review chapter 3 of my book. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit nasally because I'm congested, so I hope it's not too annoying, but I'm going to try to get through this just because I don't want to get behind. I did say that I was going to review chapter 3 this weekend, and I need to get through it this weekend so I don't get behind and not be on chapter 4 by next weekend. So with that being said, I know there's not anybody here yet, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me go to the other screen. Okay, I'm just waiting for it to come up. All right, chapter 3, the secondary breach, the master state as enforcer and profiteer. Chapter 1, prove through the disposal right test that the state owns your life by interfering with your right to an autonomous disposal. Chapter 3, identify your parents as the primary enslavers who imposed existence without your consent, benefited from that imposition, and therefore incurred the MDLE, uh, more debt for life enslavement. But parents cannot maintain this enslavement without state violence. The state commits a secondary breach by enforcing life slavery while extracting value from your involuntary existence. The state faces an impossible choice: either recognize your inalienable right to an autonomous disposal or provide full socialism as the minimum maintenance obligation for the living property it owns. The master state cannot claim ownership authority over your life without disclaiming the maintenance obligations that even slave codes require. If the master state refuses both options, it reveals itself as illegitimate. Now, I know some of you guys are new, um, but I've already reviewed chapter 1 and chapter 2, so you can go back and listen to those live streams if you're coming to this channel recently. So, Justice Stevens' concurrence in Glucksberg contains the most glaring admission in the entire legal history of life slavery. Stevens explicitly articulated why the state prohibits an autonomous disposal, not for your benefit, but for the collective's benefit, and continuing to extract value from your involuntary existence. Here's the complete quote. The state has an interest in preserving and fostering the benefits that every human being may provide to the community, a community that thrives on the exchange of ideas, expressions of affection, shared memories, and humorous incidents, as well as the material contributions that its members create and support. The value to others of a person's life is far too precious to allow the individual to claim a constitutional entitlement to complete autonomy and making a decision to end that life. Read that carefully. This is the justice. This is a justice of the Supreme Court explaining why the state cannot allow you to opt out. The state has an interest in the benefits you provide to the community, not the benefits you receive, but the benefits you provide to others. What are these benefits? Stevens specifies the exchange of ideas, expressions of affection, shared memories, humorous incidents, and material contributions. These are benefits you generate for others. Your ideas enrich others' discourse. Your affection provides emotional value to others. Your memories provide others with shared experiences. Your humor entertains others. Your material contributions fund and support the community. And then Steve states the conclusion: the value to others of a person's life is far too precious to allow the individual to claim a constitutional entitlement to complete autonomy and making a decision to end that life. The value to others, not to you. You are too valuable to the collective to be permitted to opt out. This is the master state's policy justification for maintaining life slavery. The state prohibits your autonomous disposal because others benefit from your involuntary existence. The collective extracts value from you: ideas, affection, memories, humor, material contributions. This extraction is far too precious to permit your exit. Stevens attempted to frame this as one interest among many that the state must balance, but he revealed the policy's fundamental purpose. Life slavery exists to maintain a flow of benefits from you to the collective. This is the state's unjust enrichment articulated explicitly. Your continued enslavement enriches the collective. The collective receives value at your expense. You bear all costs of maintaining your involuntary existence while others receive benefits. Stevens catalog. The paternalistic mask is removed entirely. Stevens does not claim the state prevents your autonomous disposal primarily to protect you from poor judgment or temporary despair. He states openly that your enslavement serves a collective interest in continuing its extraction. Stevens' concurrence is the most honest judicial statement about life slavery ever published. It proves that the prohibition on autonomous disposal exists not to protect individuals, but to protect the collective interest in continued extraction of value from captive populations. To understand how the court legitimizes this arrangement, we must first examine the framework it established in Glucksberg. The case involved a challenge to Washington State's ban on physician-assisted suicide, brought by physicians and terminally ill patients who argued that the ban violated the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice Rehnquist's majority opinion rejected this challenge, establishing several key principles that reveal the court's underlying rationale. The opinion first held that there is no fundamental liberty interest in assistance in committing suicide. Now, you have to go back and read chapter 1 because I explained how they got this wrong. Because they basically they're not recognizing the Ninth Amendment, that we have inalienable rights under natural law, that that the Constitution doesn't create rights; it only enumerates rights which already existed. But they have abandoned the Ninth Amendment, and now they're going with substantive due process. So under substantive due process, they go with either a liberty interest or a property interest. And if you read chapter 1, I also address how that is incorrect interpretation of the Constitution, because John Locke explained that property is a bundle of rights, which is what did he say? It's okay. Well, person is the state. Basically, it's the person, the state, and services. I'm not sure exactly how he worded it, but those are the three criteria. Like all of no. Let me correct myself. It's the person, it's the estates, and it is liberty. Those are all considered property. But the court is basically making an arbitrary distinction between property and liberty, and so they're going to make a separate analysis. You have to reach out to one. I can't really sit up here and explain it all over again. That property interests have greater protection, greater scrutiny. A liberty interest is basically subject to balancing against competing state interests. Again, I'm not going to go into detail because I already explained that in chapter 1. The opinion first held that there is no fundamental liberty interest in committing suicide, finding no such right deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. This framing itself is significant. The court treated the question as whether there exists a right to assistance, not whether states have legitimate authority to interfere with inalienable disposal rights under natural law. Again, go back and read chapter 1 because I explained this in detail. The court then identified several state interests allegedly sufficient to justify the prohibition: preserving life, preventing suicide, maintaining the integrity of the medical profession, protecting vulnerable groups from coercion, and preventing the erosion of ethical standards. These interests mirror Stevens' catalog, focusing primarily on value preservation for others rather than welfare for the individual. The court in Glucksberg failed to establish any legitimate basis for state authority to prohibit one's autonomous disposal. The court's reasoning is circular. The state has an interest in preserving life, therefore the state has authority to prohibit an autonomous disposal without ever addressing the constitutional basis for said authority. But where does this authority come from? The court never explained the source of state authority to force your enslavement. The court simply asserted that the state has an interest, cataloged those interests, and concluded that those interests justify its authority. This is question begging. The entire inquiry should be what gives the state authority to override your autonomy to serve collective interests? The state never addressed this question. A state interest is not the same as legitimate state authority. The state may have an interest in many things, extracting more taxes, constricting more soldiers, and preventing dissent. But interest alone does not create authority. The mafia has an interest in collecting protection money, but this interest does not legitimize the mafia's authority to do so. Slave owners had an interest in preventing escape, but this interest did not legitimate their authority to enslave. Interest describes what a party wants, authority describes what a party may rightfully do. The court conflated these concepts, treating the state's desire to extract value as if that desire itself creates authority to do so. The proper question is not, does the state have an interest in preventing one's autonomous disposal, but rather, does the state have legitimate authority to prohibit one's autonomous disposal? These are fundamentally different inquiries. The first asks what the state wants, the second asks what the state may rightfully do. The court answered the first question and treated it as if it resolved the second. Under natural law theory, individuals possess self-ownership which cannot be alienated. The state derives its authority from citizens' voluntary delegation of individual rights. Since individuals possess disposal rights in a state of nature, and since the state's authority extends only as far as individuals have authority to delegate, the state cannot legitimately prohibit what individuals themselves have the natural right to do. Chapter 1 established this framework. Under social contract theory, legitimate authority requires ongoing consent. As Rousseau acknowledged, a government is legitimate only when each generation maintains, a government is legitimate only when each generation remains in a position to accept or reject it. The master state's prohibition on the right to an autonomous disposal eliminates this ability, rendering all state authority illegitimate. The court failed to address this fundamental problem. How can a state claim legitimate authority over those who are prohibited from withdrawing consent? The court's failure to establish legitimate authority reveals the truth. The state exercises power, not authority. The state prohibits one's autonomous disposal because it can, because it possesses a monopoly on the use of physical force and deploys that violence whenever it wants. This is not legitimate governance. This is enslavement through brute force. The court in Glucksburg distinguished refusing unwanted medical treatment, which is constitutionally protected, from seeking assistance in dying, which is not constitutionally protected. The distinction is logically incoherent when applied to existence imposed without consent. The court held that refusing treatment is protected because it has deep roots in common law battery principles. No right is held more sacred or is more fundamentally guarded by the common law than the right of every individual to the possession and control of his own person, free from all restraint or interference of others, unless by clear and unquestionable authoritative law. But the court distinguished assistance in dying from arguing that it requires another person's affirmative assistance in causing death, whereas refusing treatment merely allows natural death to occur. The court reasoned that common law has always prohibited assisted suicide, therefore the right to medical assistance in dying lacks the historical foundation that refusal of medical treatment possesses. This distinction fails because it ignores the original battery, the imposition of existence itself. Your parents violated your bodily autonomy by bringing you to existence without your consent. This is the original battery from which all subsequent harms flow. Battery principles establish that every person possesses the right to autonomous control over their own person, free from restraint or compulsion by others. When your parents procreated, they created a person and subjected that person to existence without the person's consent. This is the original violation of bodily autonomy. It precedes and underlies all subsequent questions about treatment and assistance. The state compounds this original battery by forcing your continuation. When you seek assistance in dying, you seek remedy for your parents' original violation of bodily autonomy. You seek to undo the imposition of existence that occurred without your consent. The state that prohibits this remedy participates in an ongoing battery. It maintains the violation of bodily autonomy that your parents initiated. The court's distinction between refusing treatment and seeking assistance fails because both involve the same fundamental right, the right to an autonomous disposal over one's person. Refusing treatment asserts the right by rejecting continued medical intervention. Seeking assistance in dying asserts this right by rejecting continued existence itself. The court cannot coherently protect the right to refuse treatment while denying the right to seek assistance in dying because both rights rest on the same foundation: bodily autonomy and the right to be free from restraint or compulsion by others. If bodily autonomy protects refusal of treatment, it must also protect the refusal of continued existence, especially when that existence was originally imposed without consent. The term life slavery describes the condition in which the master state claims excuse me. The term life slavery describes the condition in which the master state claims ownership over your life while extracting value from your involuntary existence, analogous to but distinct from chattel slavery. The concept parallels wage slavery, a term developed by labor movements and abolitionists to describe the condition in which workers, though nominally free, must sell their labor to survive under conditions that negate meaningful autonomy. A wage slave is a person who works for a wage, especially with total and immediate, with total and immediate dependency on the income derived from such labor. The wage slave is not owned outright as chattel, but must continually rent himself to an employer to avoid starvation. As labor historians have documented, 19th century workers advocated, I'm just getting all over the place. Let me start over. As labor historians have documented, 19th century worker advocates and abolitionists recognize that formal freedom means little when economic necessity compels participation in exploitative arrangements. The slave is sold once and for all. The proletarian must sell himself daily and hourly. The individual slave, property of one master, is assured of an existence, however miserable it may be, by the self-interest of the master. The individual proletarian, property, as it were, of the entire bourgeois class, which buys his labor only when some has need of it, has no secure existence. Life slavery operates through a similar but more fundamental framework. Where the wage slave must sell his labor to survive, the life slave must maintain his involuntary existence to provide value to a collective. The state does not own you as chattel. It does not purchase you outright or hold title to your person. Instead, the state claims a more insidious claim of ownership, authority over your disposal rights. You are prevented from opting out. You are prevented from terminating the arrangement. You are forced to continue your involuntary existence. You must maintain that existence through your own labor, all while generating benefits that flow to others. The analogy is precise. And sorry, y'all, I told y'all the bullet points are not lined up. It was lined up when I wrote it. The analogy is precise. Chattel slavery: the master owns you outright, holds title to your person, and has the duty to maintain you as property. Wage slavery: the employer effectively rents your labor under conditions of economic coercion, benefiting from your work without formal ownership. Life slavery: the state claims authority over your existence through interference with disposal rights, extracts value from your forced continuation, but disclaims maintenance obligations. Life slavery is structurally analogous to wage slavery but operates on a more fundamental level. The wage slave must work to survive. The life slave is forced to survive in order to work. The wage slave sells his labor under economic duress. The life slave provides material contributions, an exchange of ideas, affections, memories, and humorous incidents under existential duress. The impossibility of a humane exit. The wage slave faces a threat of starvation. the life slave faces a threat of violent interference with disposal rights. Where wage slavery exploits economic necessity, life slavery exploits existential captivity. You are not owned as chattel, you are trapped in an involuntary existence and forced to generate value for a collective which refuses to release you while also refusing to maintain you. This is slavery not through ownership of the person, but through regulatory control over one's existence. The state monopolizes your disposal rights and extracts value from your inability to escape. Life slavery maintains an element that is more insidious than either chattel slavery or wage slavery. The systemic deception that your enslavement serves your own interests. The chattel slave knows he is enslaved. The master does not pretend that slavery benefits the slave. The master might claim slavery civilizes savages or fulfills a divine hierarchy, but the master does not claim to prevent the slave from escaping for the slave's own good. The relationship is transparent. The master owns the slave, extracts value from the slave's labor, and prevents escape to protect the master's own property interests. The slave understands that he serves the master's interests, not his own. The wage slave, though subjected to economic coercion, likewise understands the basic structure of the arrangement. The employer does not claim to force employment for the worker's benefit. The employer offers wages, the worker, facing the alternative of starvation, accepts. The exploitation operates through economic necessity, not through the pretense that forced labor serves the laborer. As 19th century labor advocates recognized, the wage system is exploitative precisely because workers must sell their labor to survive, not because anyone pretends this arrangement benefits workers more than employers. Life slavery, by contrast, operates through paternalistic mystification. The state does not typically admit that it forces your continuation primarily to extract value for the collective. Instead, the state wraps extraction in a paternalistic justification, claiming to prevent your autonomous disposal for two simultaneous purposes: to maintain the flow of benefits to society and to save you from your own irrationality, depression, or temporary despair. The paternalistic justification is not merely window dressing. The state genuinely claims to know what is in your best interest better than you do. But this paternalism serves its extractive purpose. By positioning itself as the wise parent protecting the childish fool, the master state obscures the fact that your involuntary existence primarily benefits others, not you. When the court in Glucksburg cataloged the state's interest, and it emphasized protecting you from your own incompetence, preventing suicide among the depressed, protecting vulnerable groups from coercion, ensuring you don't make irreversible decisions you might later regret. The paternalistic justification serves two functions. First, it obscures its extractive purpose. Justice Stevens revealed the truth. The state forces your continuation because others benefit from your participation, but the court's majority holding emphasized protection of your interests, not society's interests, in extracting value from you. Second, paternalism disarms resistance. If the state openly admitted that it forces your continuation to extract value for others, you would recognize yourself as enslaved and respond accordingly. But when the state claims to act for your own good, resistance becomes conflated with self harm. The state transforms its extraction into your protection, its ownership into your benefit. This makes life slavery psychologically tolerable in a way that chattel slavery never was. You are trained to see your enslavement as care rather than exploitation. This paternalistic deception is life slavery's most insidious feature. It operates not merely through violence, though violence backs every prohibition, but through ideological mystification that obscures its recognition as enslavement. You are enslaved, but you are indoctrinated to see your enslavement as freedom. You are held captive, but you are trained to see your captivity as protection. Now, here's figure 3.1. I'm not going to blow that up. For those who already downloaded the book, you can look at that in more detail. Um, Figure 3.1 illustrates how two breaches operate together to create life slavery. The primary breach are your life enslavers, your parents. They impose existence without consent. They benefit from you. Through meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, legacy, social validation, they create the moral debt for life enslavement. They transfer the person to state authority without that person's consent. And I explained that in greater detail in chapter 2. Now, this is the secondary breach, the master state. The master state prohibits your autonomous disposal. You have no right to opt out. It extracts value from your involuntary existence in the form of tax revenue, workforce participation, material contributions, exchange of ideas. It refuses to provide full maintenance for your enslavement, for your involuntary existence. It compounds the original breach while being enriched from it. Together, these breaches create comprehensive life enslavement. Parents impose existence and benefit from it. The state enforces continuation and benefits from it. The life slave bears all costs with no remuneration and no escape. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract, provides devastating confirmation that the modern state's relationship to citizens operates as life slavery. While Rousseau claimed to establish the foundation of legitimate political authority, his own analysis reveals the illegitimacy of both the parental breach and the state secondary breach. Rousseau's condemnation of parental overreach is explicit. Even if one, excuse me, for those who were saying that I was authoritarian for pushing anti-nasal, I really want you to pay attention to what Rousseau said. Even if each man could alienate himself, he could not alienate his children. They are born free. They are born men and born free. Let me start over because I want to make sure y'all let this sink in. Even if each man could alienate himself, he couldn't alienate his children. They are born men and born free. Their liberty belongs to them, and no one else has the right to dispose of it. This passage directly condemns procreation as it actually functions. Even if we accepted that adults could somehow alienate their own liberty, which Rousseau doubted, parents absolutely cannot alienate their children's liberty. Children are born men and born free. They possess natural liberty from birth. Yet this is precisely what procreation does. Parents dispose of their children's liberty and give it to the state. They create a person without the person's consent and deliver that person into state authority without the person's consent. They bind their children to existence, to state authority, to comprehensive legal obligations, all without obtaining the children's consent. This is exactly the illegitimate alienation of children's liberty that Rousseau explicitly condemned. As Rousseau declared, no one else has the right to dispose of it. Your liberty belonged to you from birth. Your parents disposed of it anyway by imposing existence without your consent. Rousseau acknowledges limited parental authority. Parents may lay down conditions for their preservation and well-being, while children are too young to decide for themselves. But this guardianship authority is temporary and constrained. It extends only to preservation, not to an irrevocable and unconditional gift of the child's liberty to the state. Parents who impose existence commit precisely this forbidden act. They make an irrevocable gift of you to the state, binding you to state authority without your consent, without providing you any mechanism of escape. Rousseau's conclusion is devastating to the legitimacy of state authority. And an arbitrary government cannot be legitimate unless in every generation the populace was the master of who was in a position to accept or reject it. To be legitimate, government must offer each person the ability to accept or reject subjection to its authority. Without this ability, government is arbitrary, that is, based on naked violence rather than legitimate authority. The master state denies you the ability to reject this authority and prevents you from opting out of existence. You are not allowed to withdraw from state authority over your person. By Rousseau's own standard, the standard of the social contract tradition, this renders all state authority arbitrary and illegitimate. Rousseau understood that legitimate authority requires consent that may be withdrawn. Parents have no authority to bind you permanently because such a gift is contrary to the ends of nature and exceeds the rights of paternity. The state cannot rule you permanently without ongoing consent because that would make government arbitrary. Yet the arrangement violates both principles. Your parents made an irrevocable and unconditional gift of you by imposing existence without your consent and without ensuring your ability to opt out, a gift that exceeds the rights of paternity. The state exercises arbitrary authority by denying you the ability to accept or reject your subjection to its rule, violating the condition that makes government legitimate. The unjust enrichment follows necessarily. The state extracts values from people who were given to it without their consent and who are denied the ability to withdraw that consent. This is not legitimate government deriving authority from the consent of the government. This is arbitrary power extracting value from captive populations, precisely what Rousseau condemned as illegitimate. Yet Rousseau himself reveals how thoroughly the social contract framework denies genuine disposal rights. After establishing that each generation must be in a position to accept or reject government authority, Rousseau declares elsewhere in the social contract that whoever refuses to obey the general will must be forced to be free. One reading this ominous phrase means that society has a duty to execute those who reject the social contract, to free them from existence by terminating their lives as punishment for disobedience. But Rousseau goes further. He explicitly articulates the state's ownership claim over your life. Now the citizen is no longer the judge of the risk that the law wants him to run. And when the prince says to him, "It is expedient for the state that you should die," he ought to die. Why? Because his life is no longer merely a natural good, but is a gift made conditionally by the state. It is conditional on his always meeting the state's demand. It's only on that condition that he's been living in security up to the present. This passage reveals the complete enslavement structure. Your life is not naturally yours. It's a gift made conditionally by the state. The state claims to have given you your life as a conditional grant. The state which grants this gift may revoke it when, the state which grants this gift may revoke it when expedient for the state. You are no longer the judge of when you should die. The state decides. When the state commands your death, you ought to die because your involuntary existence was always conditional on serving state purposes. Your life was never yours. It was always the state's property. Lent to you, conditional, revocable at the state's discretion when your death becomes expedient for collective interest. This is the dual breach articulated within the social contract theory. Your parents gave you life. The state claims that gift as its own conditional grant. You never owned your life. It was always the state's gift, revocable at the state's discretion. The state prohibits your autonomous disposal while claiming authority to dispose of you when your death serves state interests. The master state controls your disposal rights completely. You may neither dispose of yourself nor refuse the state's disposal of you. Let me see if there's anybody here before I keep going. Well, I promised that I was going to do it, so. Okay, do you want to debate? You can debate me when I'm done, but you're not going to pull up. So if you have anything substantive to contribute, that's fine. If you want to debate me, that's fine. But trolling, I'm not going to tolerate that. I have very limited time and I have very limited patience. So it is what it is. You can pull up or you can shut up. Now, the absurdity of death, the absurdity of death as a deterrent. You know what? Let me stop. Because I'm pretty sure I know who this is. I'm pretty sure I know who this is. This is the person who just got read for filth. You're not going to derail my live stream. You got read for filth. It is what it is. You know what? I'm not tolerating this shit. You got read for filth, and I've already blocked you, so I'm not sure why you're still trolling my channel. You're not permitted here. Get out. But execution as a form of punishment reveals a fatal flaw in state control. The threat of death cannot constrain someone who seeks death. What possible deterrent is execution of someone who already wants to die? The state prohibits one's peaceful autonomous disposal through medically assisted death. But if you commit a capital crime, the state may execute you, giving you exactly what you wanted, death. The state's ultimate The state's ultimate punishment becomes your desired outcome. The state's greatest threat becomes your solution. Consider the perversity. The state forces your continuation through violence. The state forcibly confines you if you express a desire to opt out. The state prosecutes anyone who assists you, but if you refuse to obey, if you commit crimes serious enough, the state may execute you, providing the very as it prohibits you from accessing peacefully. The state denies you the dignified death of medical assistance, but offers you the violent death of execution as punishment for disobedience. The state creates a perverse incentive. Remain a law abiding citizen, and the state will force you to continue your involuntary existence indefinitely against your will. Commit a capital crime, and the state will grant you what it otherwise prohibits death through execution. This is not about preserving life. This is about control. The state wants the final say in who gets to live and who gets to die. The state does not object to your death as such. The state executes people routinely. What the state objects to is your autonomous decision to die. The state insists that it, not you, must make the determination of when your life ends. If the state's interests were generally in preserving life, the state would not execute anyone. But the state maintains the death penalty while prohibiting assisted death. This reveals the truth. The state does not value your life. The state values its control over your life. The state will end your life when it determines your death serves state purposes. The state will force your continuation when it determines your continuation serves state interests, but the state will never permit you to make the decision autonomously. The law abiding citizen who wishes to die faces an impossible situation. Remain obedient and be forced to continue your involuntary existence indefinitely, bearing all costs while generating value for others, or commit serious crimes, harm innocents, violate others' rights, and obtain through state violence what the state prohibits you from attaining as a law-abiding citizen: death. The state is literally incentivizing those who want to die to become criminals. A person who obeys the law but wishes to die must continue suffering, continue generating value for extraction with no legal path to a peaceful exit. But a person willing to commit capital crimes can attain exit through state violence. This arrangement reveals a deeper logic beneath its apparent contradiction. The system simultaneously denies a peaceful exit while reserving a violent exit as punishment, not through incompetence, but through design. By forcing people into a false binary between enduring an unwanted existence or committing atrocities to achieve execution, the state serves its primary interest, maintaining control over both life and death. The contradiction is the point. A system generally concerned with reducing harm would invert these incentives, providing a dignified autonomous exit for those who peacefully choose it, while reserving punishment for those who violate others. But such clarity would require the state to acknowledge what it prefers to remain unexamined. That its monopoly on determining who may die and under what circumstances serves institutional power rather than individual autonomy or public safety. The state cannot provide a consistent framework because doing so would be to acknowledge one's natural right to self-ownership. The state must maintain its prohibition on the right to a peaceful exit to preserve its ownership claim. The state's control is more important than rationality, more important than preventing crime, more important than avoiding incentives for people to harm innocents in pursuit of execution. This arrangement reveals the absurdity at the heart of state control. Death is the one thing even the state cannot control. The state can kill you, but it cannot make death a punishment for someone who welcomes death. The state can threaten you with death, but this threat becomes hollow when directed at someone who seeks what the state threatens. The state's obsession with coercive control blinds it to the existence of autonomous rule. Let me read that over. The state's obsession with coercive control blinds it to the existence of autonomous moral agents capable of self-governance without the threat of violence. What restrains the person who seeks death from violating the social contract is not fear of execution, which he may welcome, but his own moral commitments to avoiding harm to others. The person who wishes to die but refrains from harming others demonstrates independent moral agency. He could obtain his desired outcome, death, through the commission of capital crimes. the state would execute him, solving his problem. Yet he refrains, not because armed men threaten him, but because he possesses ethical commitments that constrain his actions even when state threats become meaningless. State authority predicated on the necessity of external constraint cannot acknowledge this. The state cannot admit that those who most desire death are often most capable of exercising restraint through genuine ethical commitment rather than fear of punishment. To acknowledge this would be to admit that state violence is not the foundation of social order, that people can and do govern themselves through internalized moral principles that operate independently of and despite state coercion. The arrangement reveals the inversion of disposal rights. You cannot opt out peacefully through an autonomous disposal, but you can be forced out through execution if you refuse to obey. The state denies you authority over your death while claiming authority to execute you for disobedience. You have no right to dispose of yourself, but the state has the right to dispose of you. The state monopolizes the authority to end your life, whether by prohibiting your autonomous disposal or by executing you for refusing to comply with its commands. Either way, you do not own your life. Either way, the master state controls your disposal rights. The only question is whether the master state exercises those rights by forcing your continuation or by forcing your termination. But the state's control is ultimately illusory. Death remains beyond state authority. The state can terminate your life, but it cannot make you fear death if you do not fear it. The state can prohibit your autonomous disposal, but it cannot make your involuntary existence tolerable. The state can threaten execution, but it cannot make this threat meaningful to someone who seeks death. Death is the limit of state power. The state that forces your continuation through the prohibition on an autonomous disposal admits that its authority is illegitimate and derives solely from the threat of physical force. If one generally prefers death to continued enslavement, the state's entire mechanism of control collapses. The state can cage you, extract value from you, deploy violence against you, but it has no control over your response to its death threats. And once you no longer fear death, every state threat becomes hollow. Rousseau's framework, like all social contract theories, is not based on genuine consent, but because it denies the right to opt out. You cannot meaningfully accept or reject an arrangement when rejection, you cannot meaningfully accept or reject an arrangement when rejection requires committing a crime and being executed for it. This is not a voluntary agreement. It is a false choice between being punished for compliance or being punished for noncompliance. Genuine consent requires the ability to withdraw consent without punishment. If one can only leave an arrangement by committing a crime to authorize his execution, he is not free to leave. He is held captive by his refusal to harm others. The freedom to reject the social contract through criminal disobedience is analogous to the freedom of a slave to escape by provoking his master to beat him to death. A legitimate arrangement would provide unconditional and autonomous disposal rights. One should be allowed to opt out without committing any crime, without facing any punishment, simply by accessing medically assisted death with dignity. But neither Rousseau nor the modern state offers this. Rousseau offers execution for disobedience. The modern state offers involuntary continuation backed by involuntary commitment, criminal prosecution for those who assist, and comprehensive interference with disposal rights. Neither framework provides genuine consent because neither permits the right to opt out. Duties without rights make slavery, rights without duties make anarchy. This maxim captures the fundamental structure of legitimate social relationships. Legitimate authority creates reciprocal obligations. If you owe duties to another party, that party owes corresponding rights, respecting duties to you. If someone claims authority over you, they must accept responsibility towards you. The master who claims ownership must maintain his property. The parent who creates a child must provide for that child. But the master state's relationship to you violates this principle completely. The master state claims you owe comprehensive duties, obedience to law, payment of taxes, performance of jury service, submission to state authority over every aspect of your existence. Yet the master state disclaims any corresponding responsibilities towards you. Excuse me. The master state demands everything from you. Obedience. You must obey every law the master state enacts, backed by threat of violence. You cannot opt out of laws you find unjust, immoral, or oppressive. Disobedience results in fines, imprisonment, or death. You must surrender portions of your income and property to fund state operations. The master state does not ask for your consent to each expenditure. The master state extracts what it determines you owe using armed enforcement to collect. You must serve on juries when commanded. You must register for selected service. In some jurisdictions, you must assist law enforcement when directed to do so. Your labor belongs to the state when the master state demands it. You must submit to state authority over your body, prohibiting the prohibition on disposal rights. Um, I didn't even include abortion rights, that they completely regulate a woman's bodily autonomy. But it's implicit in what I'm saying, that the master state has superior disposal rights over your own person, which includes reproduction. So you must submit to state authority over your body, your property, your movement, right? Your associations, and your expression. These are comprehensive duties. You owe obedience to state authority over virtually every domain of your existence. The master state claims total jurisdiction over your person. Yet the master state claims no corresponding duties towards you, no duty to protect. Despite claiming a monopoly on the use of physical force, the master state has no constitutional duty to protect you from violence by others. The Deshaney versus Winnebago County held that the state has no affirmative duty to protect citizens from private violence. You must obey the master state's prohibition on self-harm, but the master state need not protect you when others harm you. Despite forcing your continuation through its prohibition on your right to an autonomous disposal, the master state has no duty to provide the resources necessary to make your involuntary existence tolerable. No constitutional right to housing, health care, food, or income. Despite requiring you to work to avoid starvation, the master state has no duty to ensure economic opportunities exist. You must participate in the economy, but the master state need not ensure that the economy provides opportunities for participation at living wages. Despite extracting value from your forced participation, taxes, labor, material contributions, exchange of ideas, the master state has no duty to remunerate you beyond what the market provides. Which the market structures. I'm not sure which chapter I talk about the difference between. That's chapter 7. That's chapter 7 where I talk about the difference between a free market and a free market. The libertarians believe in a free market. Anarchists believe in a free market. When I get to chapter 7, I'll explain that in greater detail. Despite your continued existence being imposed without your initial consent and maintained through the prohibition on opting out, the master state has no duty to honor your withdrawal of consent through recognition of disposal rights. The master state claims comprehensive rights over you, the right to tax you, to regulate you, to prohibit your autonomous disposal, to extract value from your forced participation, while effectively disclaiming all duties towards you. This is not legitimate authority. This is anarchy from the top down, the powerful party claiming rights without accepting corresponding duties. In legitimate relationships, rights and duties are reciprocal. Parents have rights over their minor children, but they also owe duties of care. Masters have rights over property, but masters owe duties of maintenance. Citizens are supposed to have rights against the state, and the state is supposed to owe duties to protect those rights. But the master state inverts this structure. The master state claims you owe duties without enjoying meaningful corresponding rights. The master state claims it possesses rights over you without owing corresponding duties towards you. This is the definition of slavery. Comprehensive duties imposed on you, zero responsibilities accepted by the party claiming authority. Justice Stevens revealed the state's extractive purpose when he acknowledged the state's interest in the value you provide to society. You owe a duty to continue existing, to maintain that existence through your own labor, and to provide contributions to society. The master state owes you nothing. If you become homeless, the master state permits your suffering. If you go hungry, the master state permits your starvation. If you cannot afford medical care, the master state permits your deterioration. Yet the master state continues extracting taxes, continues prohibiting an autonomous disposal, and continues claiming authority to force your continued participation. The state disclaimer of responsibility violates principles recognized even within systems of chattel slavery. Aristotle observed that slaves are living possessions and instruments for action. Because the slave's labor generates value for the master must preserve the slave's captivity to perform labor by providing sustenance. This is not benevolence. This is a rational property management. Excuse me. It is rational property management. Property that produces value must be maintained or it ceases producing value. American slave codes, despite their primary purpose of control and domination, nevertheless recognize that masters own maintenance obligations to their human property. The South Carolina Slave Code of 1740 mandated that slaves were entitled to sufficient food, clothing, and shelter, and section, I'm not even sure whatever that is, permitted slaves to file complaints against owners who failed to provide basic necessities, authorizing courts to order relief. Similarly, Virginia's slave code required masters to provide sufficient food and clothing. Y'all probably didn't know that, right? Y'all probably didn't know that masters actually owe duties to protect and provide for their slaves, because it's basically a waste of property. Y'all can go back and look that up. I have my footnotes at the end of the book for those who have already downloaded it. These codes did not arise from humanitarian concern. They arose from the recognition that living property must be maintained to preserve its productive capacity. A starving, ill-clothed, sick slave cannot work effectively. Masters who fail to maintain their property destroy their investment. The codes compel minimum maintenance to prevent this economic waste. If the state owns your life, as Chapter 1 established through the disposal rights test, then the state owns living property. You are, in the state's framework, an instrument whose continued existence generates value for the collective. Justice Stevens articulated this explicitly. The state prevents your autonomous disposal because your existence provides value to society, your labor, your taxes, your material contributions, your exchange of ideas. The state claims a master's authority to prevent disposal. As such, the state cannot disclaim a master's obligation to provide maintenance. Even the logic of slavery, even the actual legal codes that govern chattel slavery in America, recognize that masters must preserve the property from which they extract value. You should not have to pay for your own enslavement. The master state must either accept its duty, provide comprehensive socialism as a minimum maintenance obligation for property it owns, or relinquish its claim rights by recognizing your autonomous disposal rights. The master state cannot maintain both positions, claiming total authority while disclaiming all responsibility. Chapter 2 establishes the unjust enrichment framework. One party receives benefits at another expense, under circumstances making retention unjust. Here we apply this framework to state action. Element 1, the master state is enriched. The master state receives comprehensive benefits from your continuation. Tax revenue from your income, property, and consumption. Workforce participation maintains economic productivity. Consumer spending generates economic activity. Material contribution to society, as Justin Stevens acknowledged, exchange of ideas, expressions of affection, shared memories, and humorous incidents enrich collective life. Political legitimacy is derived from population size and participation, military and civic service when demanded. These benefits come entirely at your expense. You bear all costs for maintaining an involuntary existence, time, labor, resources, and suffering. The master state extracts value without providing adequate maintenance. You must work to generate the income that the state taxes. You must participate in the economy to maintain the productivity the state requires. You must provide the contributions and exchanges that benefit others. You bear comprehensive costs to provide benefits that the state extracts. Element 3, retention is unjust. Circumstances make the master state retention of these benefits unjust. Lack of consent. You never agreed to provide these benefits. The master state forces your continuation regardless of your consent. Prohibition on exit. You cannot withdraw from this arrangement. The master state prohibits your autonomous disposal, ensuring you remain subject to extraction whether you consent to or not. Absence of remuneration. The master state provides no adequate provision for the benefit it extracts and refuses to fulfill its comprehensive maintenance obligations. Violation of natural rights. The master state violates your natural rights to self-ownership by interfering with your disposal rights. The master state violates consent requirements for legitimate authority under the social contract theory. Legitimate authority requires the ongoing ability to accept or reject subjection to government authority. The prohibition on autonomous disposal eliminates this ability, rendering state authority wholly arbitrary. Therefore, the master state is enriched at your expense under circumstances that make retention unjust. The master state owes restitution for this unjust enrichment. What life slavery requires. The court's framework in Cruzen and Glucksberg create an impossible situation that logically requires one of two remedies. Remedy one, recognizing your natural right to an autonomous disposal. If the court is serious about bodily autonomy and the right to be free from unwanted restraint, it must recognize a natural right to an autonomous disposal over one's person. This right should permit access to medically assisted death without state-imposed criteria beyond verification of capacity and voluntariness. This remedy follows from the court's own precedent. If bodily autonomy protects the refusal of life-sustaining treatment, it must also protect the refusal of life-sustaining existence. The distinction the court drew in Glucksberg is arbitrary and incoherent. Both the refusal of a treatment and seeking assistance in dying exercise the same fundamental right to control one's own person. Recognizing this right would eliminate the secondary breach. The state would no longer force continuation against your will. You could opt out peacefully through medically assisted means. Remedy two, if the court refuses to recognize protection for your autonomous disposal, if the state maintains the prohibition that forces your continuation, then the state must provide comprehensive material support as the minimal maintenance obligations for the property it owns. Chapter 1 establishes that the state owns your life through the prohibition on your disposal rights. If the state owns your life, the state owns living property, even within systems of chattel slavery. Even the actual legal codes that govern human bondage in America, masters recognize duties to maintain their property. This was not benevolence. This was basic property law. Owners must maintain property that produces value or it ceases to produce value. If the state owns living property that generates benefits through its continued existence, it must maintain that property or forfeit the benefit of ownership. The fundamental principle is simple. You should not have to pay for your own enslavement. The master state forces your continuation. The master state extracts value from your forced participation. The master state claims ownership through the prohibition on disposal. Therefore, the master state must bear the cost of maintaining the property it owns. Full socialism is the minimum maintenance obligation for property that the state owns. If the state owns you, as Chapter 1 proved it does, then the state must maintain you or admit it operates as a parasite, extracting value without accepting the minimum obligations that chattel slavery acknowledged. Full socialism means universal health care, ensuring comprehensive medical care without cost, universal basic income, ensuring adequate resources for a dignified existence, universal housing, ensuring shelter without the threat of homelessness, universal food security, ensuring adequate nutrition without the threat of hunger, universal education without debt, guaranteed employment at living wages for all who can work, comprehensive. I'm sorry, y'all. This is horrible. This was not like this when I wrote it and uploaded it. It got completely misaligned. Comprehensive social support, eliminating economic coercion. These are the basic responsibilities of owning human capital. These two remedies address different breaches. Remedy 1 addresses the secondary breach, state prohibition on autonomous disposal. Remedy 2 addresses the unjust enrichment from extraction during forced continuation. Ideally, the state should implement both remedies, recognize the natural rights to opt out, and provide full socialism for those who choose to maintain their existence. But at a minimum, the state must implement one remedy. The state cannot maintain both positions simultaneously, forcing continuation through the prohibition on autonomous disposal, refusing comprehensive maintenance. This combination, forced continuation without adequate support, is life slavery. The state extracts value from your forced participation while disclaiming an obligation to maintain a property it owns. This is the master state operating as enslaver and profiteer. Chapter 1 establishes that you don't own your life. Chapter 2 identified your parents as the primary enslavers who imposed existence without consent. This chapter demonstrated how the state compounds the original breach committed by your parents. The state commits a secondary breach by prohibiting an autonomous disposal, forcing your involuntary existence regardless of consent, extracting value from your forced participation, refusing to provide comprehensive maintenance despite forcing continuation, operating through paternalistic deception that disguises extraction as protection, articulating Justice Stevens that continuation serves a collective benefit. The state must either recognize your natural right to an autonomous disposal or provide full socialism as remuneration. If the state refuses both options, then it reveals itself as illegitimate. The state maintains its voluntary interference with disposal rights while extracting value without adequate remuneration. This is life slavery, comprehensive enslavement through control over disposal rights. Let me see if there's anybody still here. Okay, well, I'm glad that one troll is gone. I hope to never hear from you again. If you do not have the right to cease to be, then you do not have the right to existence itself, neither liberty nor property, and never did in the first. Well, that's the reason why John Locke actually called property. There were three subsects of property. It's property in your person, in your estate, and liberty. They're the same right. They're species of the same right. The court has arbitrarily decided to distinguish between liberty and property, but it's the same right. From where there is one thing lies the other existence or cessation of being. One must have the ability to willfully decide what to do with both, or else they be a supreme prisoner. I'm not even going to say prisoner. I'm going to say slave. I'm going to stick to my language because it's worse than just being a prisoner, because they're extracting value. They're extracting tangible benefits, financial extraction, subjugation, a complete deprivation of natural rights, and you don't have the ability to escape. So, a prisoner, provided you're not well, I mean, I guess you would say you're a prisoner, but I would go further to say that you're a slave. Like you're no, I would say, I guess, like if you're a slave, then you're a prisoner. So I would go with the broader concept, which includes being a prisoner. So you're correct, but I think it's more precise to say that you're a slave. Um, all slaves are prisoners because you're held captive. You can't escape. You don't have any fucking rights, and your existence serves others. Like others are extracting value from your existence. It does not benefit you. Um, right. So that troll, I was going to allow him to come up here and debate me, but I recognize who that troll was, and he's not welcome on my channel. So um, he got read for filth yesterday. You're not welcome on my channel. Poof, be gone. Do not ever come back here again. All right, y'all. Y'all have a good rest of your day. I'm going to be reviewing chapter 4 probably next weekend, and so um for those who were not able to get the, well, I think that ship has sailed. If you want to read the book, it is available, but I've already made it available for free. So anyone who didn't get it, unfortunately, you're going to have to actually buy it at this point because I made it available free twice now. So y'all have a good day.